There we go. This topic is a subtle yet potent form of hybrid legal warfare. And this presentation will examine how legal ambiguity, identity manipulation, and institutional fragility have been strategically used to undermine Georgian sovereignty without a single shot fired. I will argue that this policy is not simply about legal documents or citizenship. It is about sovereignty, jurisdiction, and identity. It is about how a state can be slowly unmade not through tanks or missiles, but through paperwork, pensions, and passports. Let me begin with some basic definitions. Passportization refers to the practice of a state, most notably Russia, granting citizenship en masse to populations residing in disputed separatist territories. While this is often framed as a humanitarian gesture or a response to statelessness, in reality it functions as a highly strategic tool of hybrid warfare. It allows for the projection of influence, the redefinition of loyalties, and even the basis for military or diplomatic intervention without overtly violating territorial borders. In my research, I introduced two concepts to help us understand how this policy works in practice. The first concept, called legal gray zone exploitation. Now, this refers to the manipulation of legal ambiguity, especially fragile post-conflict states, to assert influence where formal sovereignty is weak to and unenforceable. Second concept is called silent displacement through legal absorption. This describes a situation in which individuals remain in place physically, but are reclassified legally and politically through the acquisition of a foreign citizenship. It's displacement without movement, where the shift happens not on the ground, but on a paper. Let us turn briefly to the legal foundations. After the breakup of the Soviet Union, Georgia adopted its 1991 Citizenship Decree and 1993 Organic Law on Citizenship, which automatically granted citizenship to residents of its territory, including those in Abkhazia and the Tskhinvali region, unless they formally renounced it, of course. But no such renunciations ever occurred. Despite this, in the early 2000s, Russia began issuing passports to tens of thousands of residents in these regions. This was done through without Georgia's consent, and more importantly, without the genuine link required under international law, especially as defined by the International Law Commission's draft articles on diplomatic protection. This move violated not only Georgia's domestic law, but also Russia's own citizenship legislation, which had imposed strict deadlines on when former Soviet citizens could apply for naturalization. The policy also contravened the 1997 European Convention on Nationality, which prohibits arbitrary and politically motivated naturalization practices. To better understand the legal violations underpinning Russia's passportization policy, we must revisit a key moment in its development. The adoption of 2002 Russian citizenship law, formerly known as a law number 62FZ, which came into force on July 1st, 2002, it introduced a simplified naturalization process for former Soviet citizens, allowing stateless individuals from post-Soviet republics to acquire Russian citizenship with fewer requirements. On the surface, it appeared to be a technical measure for resolving citizenship issues, lingering since the USSR's collapse. However, in practice, the 2002 law was applied not to stateless persons, but to entire populations in Georgia's breakaway regions of Abkhazia and the Tskhinvali region, who were already considered Georgian citizens under both Georgian law and international legal standards. Let's examine the contradictions. First and foremost, under the Georgian domestic law, the 1991 Decree on Citizenship and the 1993 Organic Law on Georgian Citizenship had already granted citizenship to all residents of Georgia, including those in Abkhazia and Trinvali region. Unless these individuals formally renounce their Georgian citizenship, which, according to the 2009 Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on the War in Georgia, they didn't ever do. They remained legal citizens of Georgia. As the same commission report states clearly, no formal renunciation of Georgian citizenship was documented among the populations of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Therefore, by issuing Russian passports to these individuals, Russia directly uh, interfered in the legal relationship between the Georgian state and its citizens, undermining Georgian sovereignty and violating its domestic law. Second, the policy also violated Russia's own previous legal framework. Russia's 1991 citizenship law allowed former Soviet citizens to apply for Russian nationality, but only if they did so before February 6, 1993, and only if they were residing in the former Russian Federation or were stateless. Let me quote the original 1991 legislation. Citizens of the former USSR permanently residing in Russia may acquire Russian nationality by registration until February 6, 1993. Yet, the mass distribution of Russian passports in Georgia began much later, in 2002, long after this deadline. And crucially, the recipients were neither residents of Russia nor legally stateless people. Even the 2002 law, which allowed simplified naturalization, was meant for individuals permanently residing in Russia or recognized as stateless. The residents of Abkhazia and the Tskhinvali region met neither of these criteria. In bypassing these restrictions, Russia selectively reinterpreted its own law for geopolitical gain. And third, and perhaps the most important part, is that this policy violated international legal norms. According to the 2008 draft Articles on Diplomatic Protection by the International Law Commission, a state may only confer nationality when there exists a genuine link between the individual and the state. Russia's mass naturalization of individuals who had neither lived in Russia nor maintained any substantial ties to it violates this principle. These people were born and lived in Georgia, had legal Georgian citizenship, and had no established personal or professional connection to the Russian Federation. As legal scholar Annie Peters rightly argues, extraterritorial naturalization without genuine link constitutes a form of indirect annexation. Similarly, scholars like Rainer Bubok and Yossi Harpaz define this practice as strategic citizenship, a deliberate distortion of legal citizenship for the purpose of geopolitical expansion. In summary, the 2002 Russian citizenship law, while appearing procedurally neutral, became a political instrument. It was used to override Georgian law, contradict earlier Russian law, and flout the norms of international legal order. And by doing so, Russia used the language of law to engage in what I call a legal gray zone exploitation. Now, this strategy didn't require formal annexation or military intervention. Instead, it used legal mechanisms to silently displace Georgia's jurisdiction, rewrite the legal identity of its citizens, and extend Russian influence deep into contested territories, all under the guise of legality. So, how did Russia justify this? By exploiting Georgia's institutional fragility. After years of civil war, economic collapse, and internal political instability, Georgia simply lacked the administrative machinery to enforce its citizenship laws in the separatist regions. Russia framed this as neglect and stepped in as the protector of these people. But the legal dimension is only one part of the story. Equally important is the political and identity transformation that followed this policy. Russia's strategy was twofold. First, it cultivated the economic dependency. Russian pension payments in Abkhazia were 16 times higher than those offered by the local de facto authorities. Scholarships to Russian universities, healthcare support, and public services were all conditioned on holding a Russian passport. Over time, this turned Russian citizenship into a tool of economic survival for these people. Second strategy, Russia was engaged in a process of cultural and identity reengineering. Through dominance of Russian language in education and administration, the introduction of Russian legal and symbolic narratives, and the promotion of Russian historical memory, Moscow began to reshape the identity of the population of these two breakaway regions. In Trinvali region, for example, in 2011, referendum made Russian an official language alongside Ossetian language. In Abkhazia, although presidential candidates are required to speak the Abkhaz language, the real lingua franca of governance and education is Russian language. The combination of constructivist identity policies and dependency theory reveals the full scope of Russia's passportization strategy. It's not just a legal irregularity, it is a state-sponsored identity transformation project. It uses the administrative mechanisms of citizenship to shift loyalty, erase former affiliations, and embed contested regions into Russia's geopolitical orbit. And the results are undeniable. Today, over 90% of the population in Abkhazia and the Tskhinvali region hold Russian passports. Many of them rely on Russian pensions and their children to Russian universities and consume Russian media as their primary source of information. Without a single tank crossing the border, Russia has replaced Georgia's jurisdiction with its own, not through force, but through forms, subsidies, and schooling. This is what I call silent displacement through legal absorption. It is a strategy that transforms the state-citizen relationship from within. It's subtle, deniable, and highly effective. In conclusion, the passportization policy in Georgia's breakaway regions should be recognized for what it truly is, a carefully executed form of legal hybrid warfare. It undermines the principles of sovereignty, non-intervention, and genuine nationality. It creates legal subjects of the Russian Federation within the borders of another sovereign state. And it redefines identity and allegiance without a single border needed to change. The implications go beyond Georgia. Similar strategies have been employed in Ukraine, in Crimea, in Donbass, in Moldovan Transnistrian disputed region. If unchallenged, this model could be replicated elsewhere, wherever there is institutional weakness, contested sovereignty, or vulnerable populations. Therefore, I conclude by urging the international community and the academic community alike, we must look beyond the visible symptoms of conflict and focus on the legal and identity-based instruments being used to reshape the post-Soviet space and potentially other fragile regions worldwide. Now, passportization is not a technicality, it is a weapon. And we must learn how to disarm it, not just legally, but also conceptually and strategically. Thank you very much for your attention.